In the previous step, when we added in OAuth resource server configuration, we saw that we need JWT decoder. And JWT decoder is step 4 in here. Before we'd be able to create a JWT decoder, we would need to create an RSA key pair. We would need to create a public key and private key. Once we have that, we can create something called an RSA key object. And after that, we can create something called a JWK source or a JSON web key source. And only after that, we can go ahead and use this for decoding. Are you ready to get all of this working? Let's get started. Let's start with creating a key pair. The thing is, there is a tool called OpenSSL, which you can use to create RSA public and private keys. However, what we want to do is to create this key pair through code. And what we'll be making use of is a Java class called key pair generator. So if you open up the type key pair generator, you can see that this is part of Java security. And this can actually, and this has methods, for example, generate key pair, which can be used to create a key pair. What we'll do is we'll create an RSA algorithm key pair. So let's go ahead and configure that. So at bean, we want to create a key pair. So public key pair, and we want to make use of the key pair generator class. We want to get an instance for the RSA algorithm. So let's get an instance for the RSA algorithm. And this is key pair generator. And once we have the key pair generator, we can also set the key size. The bigger the key size, the higher the security. So I'll say initialize, and you can provide a key size in here. Let's say I would want to use 2048-bit RSA encryption. And after that, I can go ahead and create the key pair. So now key pair generator dot generate key pair. Let's organize imports. Once you organize imports, you should see a couple of imports come in at the top. You have a key pair and the key pair generator. You should also see a compilation error. The get instance throws an unhandled exception. The get instance throws an exception, no such algorithm exception. Therefore, we need to handle it. So what I'll do in here is to say try and move all this code and tab in all the code. And I'll say catch any exception EX. I would say throw new runtime exception EX. So we are converting a checked exception into an unchecked or runtime exception. So that looks good. We have the key pair up and running. Next, we would need to create an RSA key object using key pair. We'd be using a library called Nimbus to do the RSA encoding and decoding. Nimbus is already part of our class path. This is brought in by our OAuth resource server dependency. And therefore, what we would try and do is to create an RSA key object. Let's go ahead and see how to create a Nimbus RSA key object. So it would be at bean public RSA key, and over here goes all the configuration. So what we want to do in here is new RSA key dot. You can see that there is a builder which is present in here, which accepts a public key. So let's pass in the public key which we got in here. I would pass in the key pair as an argument in here. Whatever bean is created in here, it would be passed in. It would be auto-wired in by Spring Framework in here. And now we can make use of the key pair. And in the key pair, there are two keys, public key and private key. So what we would need to do, what we need to use is the public key. So key pair dot get public. So new RSA key dot builder key pair dot get public. Let's organize imports. We want to import com nimbus ds JWK RSA key. That's the one we would be making use of. And after that, we would also need to configure the private key. So private key pair dot get private. We'll configure a ID. So I'll say key ID, and I will generate a key ID. So UUID dot random UUID dot to string. And last is to build and return it back. Now let's format this a little bit. So our new RSA key dot builder dot all these. Over here, we would need to actually typecast this. So RSA public key. Let's organize inputs. You would see that RSA public key is imported in Java Security Interfaces RSA public key. And we can go ahead and save this. So we now have the RSA key object ready as well. The next thing is to create something called a JWK source. This is a JSON web key source. Typically, you can create a JSON set with multiple keys. What we'll do is we'll create a JWK set with just one key, which is the RSA key. And once we have the JWK set, we will create JWK source using the JWK set. Let's see how to do that right now. So we'll be creating JWK source. The thing is, all this is just one-time setup. So having a high-level overview should be more than sufficient. This is not something you'd be changing every day. So JWK source. Let's organize imports. You can see that JWK source also comes from Nimbus DS, JOS, JWK source. So what we would need to be able to do this is the RSA key. So I'll actually take this as make it a parameter in here. So this bean which is created in here would be auto-wired in here, and we'll be using the RSA key in here. So what I'll do is say new JWK set of RSA key, where JWK set is equal to. Let's do an organize imports. You should see com Nimbus DS, YOS, JWK set imported in. That looks good. Next, what we need to do is to create a JWK source using the JWK set. So let's do a Control-Shift-T JWK source. And if you look at this specific JWK source, there is a get method which we need to override. So we'll need to create an implementation of this overriding, providing an implementation for the get method. So let's do that in here. So I would say new JWK source, and let's go ahead and provide control 1 and unimplemented methods. What we need to do is to provide an implementation to this. So I'll do a control D or command D, remove the empty line. And over here, what we want to do is JWK selector dot select this specific set. So this would be var JWK source. What we are doing in here is always selecting this specific JWK set. So whenever we would want to use the keys, we will use this key set. And that's what we are configuring here. The source of the key sets is this. Now, the thing is, this code might look a little complex, right? So all this looks really, really complex. We can simplify this further as a Lambda function. How can I simplify this as a Lambda function? If you write this as a Lambda function, it's very, very easy. So I just need to put JWK selector, comma, context. So these are the arguments, and I would want to just return this back. So I would need to just say, do this. You can see how Lambda functions make things easy. Right now I can remove all this code, and I can actually remove this variable assignment and say return this back. Let's organize imports. So JWK source is now in here. This would be returning a JWK source of security context. So let's organize imports. Let's use com Nimbus. Let's use the one from Nimbus. Nice. So step by step, we are making progress. The first thing was to create a key pair. The second thing was to create an RSA key. After that, we created a JWK source using the RSA key. And the next thing is to create the RSA public key for decoding. And we'll be using the Nimbus framework to do that. So let's go ahead and create the JWT decoder bean right now. So this is the bean. Finally, we got here. Finally, we might have our application running again. So we would want to import JWT decoder. So you would see that JWT decoder would be imported in. You can see that org Spring Framework Security Auth to JWT JWT decoder is imported in. That looks good. And how do we create this? If you open up a type called Nimbus JWT decoder, you can see that Nimbus provides both decoders and encoders. Let's start with using decoders. So if you look at this specific class, there are a lot of methods. What we'll do is we'll use the with public key method, which accepts an RSA public key. We'll create an instance of this and we will use it for decoding. So let's go ahead and do that. So Nimbus JWT decoder org Spring Framework Security Auth to JWT dot with public key. Where is the public key present? The public key is present in our RSA key. So I would actually wire RSA key in here. And over here, I would say RSA key dot to RSA public key. So Nimbus JWT decoder with public key this and dot build and return that back. This is having a compilation error, unhandled exception type use exception. I'll do a control 1 and add throws. We are not going to wire this bean directly, so it's okay if we throw the exception out. So that looks good. And now you should see the application startup fine. So if you go to the application startup, if you actually stop the application and start the application up again, you should see that the application would start up fine. That's awesome. What we have done in this step until now is to create a key pair. And after that, we wrote a lot of code. Our end goal was to configure a decoder for the JWT token. So we now have the decoder ready.